The rooster crowed at dawn, and sunlight spilled across the rolling fields of Emily Carter's farm. Dew clung to the grass, glistening like diamonds in the soft glow of morning. For most, this land was just another modest patch of earth. Wooden fences, a red barn in need of new paint, and rows of crops swaying gently in the wind. But to Emily, it was everything. She stepped out onto the porch, a steaming mug of black coffee in her hand. Her son, 10-year-old Luke, darted past her, already chasing after the family's border collie. His laughter echoed across the yard, bouncing off the barn walls and filling the air with a warmth Emily clung to. She allowed herself a small smile. This was what she had fought for. This peace, this simplicity. To the neighbors in town, Emily was just a hard-working single mother. She hauled feed, fixed fences, and ran the farm with a toughness people admired. Her hands were rough, her back strong, and her will unshakable. Most folks simply saw her as resilient, a woman who had weathered hardship and chosen to keep moving forward. But what they didn't know, what she never spoke of, was the life she had lived before the farm. Years ago, Emily had worn a different uniform, not denim and boots, but camouflage fatigues and a rifle slung across her shoulder. She had been one of the few, one of the elite, trained as a Green Beret sniper. Her world had been deserts, jungles, and mountains, her days measured in missions, her nights broken by the silence after gunfire. She had learned to wait, to breathe, to strike with precision that never missed. But that part of her life was locked away. She had buried it with medals she never displayed, scars she never explained, and memories she refused to share. Here, she was simply Emily, the farmer, and she preferred it that way. She walked the fence line that morning, checking posts, listening to the rustle of the wind through the corn. Her rifle now was nothing more than an old .22 for coyotes and foxes. Her battles were weeds, drought, and the endless bills that piled up on her kitchen table. Luke ran to catch up with her, panting. "Mom, can we go into town later? Mr. Jacobs is bringing in calves, and he said I could help." Emily ruffled his hair, her smile softening. "We'll see, kiddo. Depends on how much work the farm throws at us today." Luke pouted, but only for a moment before sprinting off again, his energy boundless. Emily watched him go, pride swelling in her chest. He was her reason, her anchor. In town, whispers sometimes followed her. Some wondered how she managed alone, raising a boy and running a farm with no man at her side. Others admired her grit, calling her tough as nails. But no one dared to guess the truth, that she had once been tougher than the men they sent to war. Emily kept it that way. People didn't need to know. They didn't need to see the sharpness in her eyes when she measured distances without thinking, or the way her muscles tensed at sudden noises. They didn't need to know why she always sat facing the door in diners, why she scanned rooftops without realizing it, why she could drive a nail into a post from 50 yards with a hunting bow just for fun. No, the quiet life was enough. As the sun climbed higher, Emily paused at the barn, wiping sweat from her brow. She leaned on the fence post, sipping what remained of her coffee. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the calm, the wind rustling through leaves, the dog barking in the distance, her son's laughter still ringing faintly across the field. It was a fragile peace, and deep down she knew it. The world had a cruel way of testing strength just when you thought you had left the battles behind. But for now, she savored it, because Emily Carter was more than just a farmer. More than just a mother, she was a soldier who had traded rifles for plows, missions for chores, and if anyone ever tried to take this life from her, they would learn quickly, too quickly, that a Green Beret sniper never truly put down her rifle. The little town near Emily's farm wasn't the kind of place strangers noticed. It had one main street, a diner that doubled as the gossip hub, a hardware store, a feed shop, and a gas station that always seemed to have one pump out of order. Life moved slow here, the kind of slow people liked. Everyone knew everyone, and change wasn't welcome. That's why the roar of motorcycles one Saturday morning rattled the town like thunder on a cloudless day. Engines snarled down Main Street, echoing off the storefronts. People inside the diner froze, coffee cups halfway to their lips. Through the windows they watched as a group of outlaw bikers rolled in. Black leather vests with skull patches, and eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. There were 8 of them, maybe more, their presence loud and intrusive, drowning out the quiet rhythms of the town. The sheriff's cruiser sat parked outside the station, but the sheriff himself didn't step out. He watched from the porch, chewing slowly on a toothpick, his jaw tight. The bikers pulled up outside the diner, their machines lined up like soldiers on parade. They dismounted with deliberate swagger, boots striking the pavement like they owned it. Inside, the chatter died completely. The clink of forks against plates was the only sound left. At the counter, old Mr. Jacobs leaned toward the waitress. "Outlaws," he muttered, his voice gravelly. "Not the kind that stop for coffee and pie, either." The waitress bit her lip nervously. "What do they want here?" Jacobs shook his head. "Nothing good." The gang's leader, a tall man with a jagged beard and a scar slicing through his eyebrow, pushed open the diner door. The bell above it jingled innocently, out of place against the tension that followed him in. His men trailed behind, their heavy boots thudding against the linoleum floor. The leader scanned the room slowly, his gaze sweeping over every face. The townsfolk lowered their eyes. No one spoke. Finally, he grinned. "Well, ain't this cute? Little slice of nowhere." He sauntered to the counter, dropped himself onto a stool, and smacked the menu with the back of his hand. "Coffee, black, and keep it coming." The waitress hurried to pour. His men sprawled across booths and tables, loud and careless, their laughter sharp in the quiet diner. One grabbed a sugar jar and dumped half of it into his mouth, snickering when the waitress flinched. Another propped his boots on a chair, glaring at anyone who looked too long. The leader took his coffee, sipped, and smiled. "Yeah," he muttered. "I think I like it here." By afternoon, word had spread. At the feed store, customers whispered about the Outlaws strutting through town like they owned it. At the gas station, the clerk told anyone who'd listen about how they revved their engines and scared off 2 families who'd stopped to fill up. And by evening, the whispers carried to Emily's farm. Luke came running into the kitchen, his cheeks flushed. "Mom, everyone in town's talking. There's bikers, bad ones." Mr. Jacobs said they're trouble. Emily set down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. "What kind of trouble?" Luke shrugged, breathless. "Scaring people. Acting like they own the place." Emily nodded slowly. She had seen men like that before, in villages overseas on dusty roads where power was measured in intimidation. She recognized the pattern already. Arrive loud, plant fear, then take what you want. The next day, the bikers tested the boundaries further. They lingered at the gas station, blocking pumps for anyone else who pulled in. They heckled people outside the hardware store, laughing when customers hurried inside. Their leader even strolled into the sheriff's office, grinning like a man daring someone to challenge him. The sheriff, cornered by politics and fear, did nothing more than tip his hat and mutter about keeping the peace. The bikers had gotten the message loud and clear. The town wasn't going to fight back, and predators always smelled weakness. By the end of the week, they had turned their eyes outward, scanning the land beyond the town. Farms stretched for miles, each one quieter and more isolated than the last. Perfect places for a gang to lay low, stash supplies, or claim territory. When they rode past Emily's farm for the first time, Luke spotted them from the porch. The roar of their engines shook the boards beneath his feet. He rushed inside, his voice trembling. "Mom, it's them." Emily dried her hands on a towel, walked to the window, and watched as the Outlaws slowed their bikes, their gazes sweeping over her fields. One pointed toward the barn, laughing. Another gestured at her fences. The leader lingered longest, his eyes narrowing as he studied the farmhouse. He smiled before revving his engine and rolling on. Emily's jaw tightened. They hadn't picked their target yet, but she knew. Soon, they would. And when they did, they'd learn the truth the hard way. The single mother they saw on that porch wasn't just a farmer. She was a Green Beret sniper, and she had never forgotten how to fight for what was hers. The morning began like any other. Emily rising before dawn, her boots crunching across the dew-soaked grass as she let the chickens out of their coop. Luke trailed behind her sleepily, carrying a bucket half his size. The dog barked at a distant crow, the barn creaked in the wind, and for a few hours the world felt normal. But peace never lasted long when trouble prowled nearby. By mid-afternoon, the low growl of engines drifted over the hills. Luke froze in the yard, his small hands tightening around the bucket handle. "Mom," he whispered. Emily already knew. She wiped her hands on her jeans and straightened. her eyes fixed on the dirt road that cut across her property. Dust plumed in the distance, catching the golden light of the setting sun. Then came the roar, louder, closer, invasive. The Outlaws. 8 of them rode in, their bikes kicking gravel as they slowed. They spread out casually in front of the farmhouse, engines idling like beasts waiting to pounce. The leader swung off his machine first, the scar across his eyebrow catching the light. His grin was wide, his eyes cold. Well, well, he drawled, looking up at the porch. A little piece of paradise. Shame it's wasted on one woman and a kid. Luke pressed closer to his mother, his heart pounding. Emily's hand brushed his shoulder briefly, a quiet signal to stay calm, to stay behind her. The men dismounted, their boots thudding on the dirt. One spat into the ground near the fence. Another tugged at a post until it snapped loose, laughing as he tossed it aside. "Solid land you've got here," one said, running his hand along the fence rail. "Good fields. Strong barn. Could be useful to men like us." Emily didn't flinch. She leaned casually against the porch railing, her expression calm, unreadable. "This is private property," she said evenly. "You're trespassing," the leader smirked, tilting his head. "Hear that, boys? She thinks she owns the dirt under our boots." Laughter rippled through the group. One picked up a glass bottle from his saddlebag, threw it against the barn wall and watched it shatter. Another aimed his pistol at an old scarecrow in the field and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the evening air, the scarecrow's head snapping back as stuffing flew. Luke gasped. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice stayed calm. "You've made your point. Now leave." The leader sauntered closer, his boots crunching on the gravel path. He stopped a few feet from the porch, looking her up and down like a predator sizing prey. "Lady," he said, his tone turning sharp, "we don't leave, not unless we decide it, and right now I like this place. I like it a lot." He turned, gesturing at the fields. "Flat land, good cover, plenty of space. Could be a perfect clubhouse." The others cheered and hooted at the idea. One slapped the hood of Emily's truck. Another stomped on the wooden steps leading to the porch. Emily's jaw tightened, but she didn't move. Luke tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Mom, please." Her hand squeezed his gently. "Stay steady," her eyes told him. "Don't show fear." The leader leaned closer, his grin twisting. "You got 2 choices. You pack up, take the kid and run, or we come back tomorrow and make sure you regret staying." Silence stretched. The only sounds were the ticking of cooling engines and the caw of a distant crow. Emily finally spoke, her voice low, steady, and chillingly calm. "You should rethink that plan." The laughter faltered. A few of the men shifted uncomfortably as though her tone carried a weight they couldn't name. But the leader barked out a laugh, trying to smother the unease. "You hear that, boys? She thinks she's got teeth." More laughter followed, though thinner this time. Emily's eyes stayed locked on his. "I'll say this once. Leave my land. Don't come back." The leader's grin faded. He spat on the porch steps and pointed a finger at her. "Tomorrow," he promised. "We'll be back. And next time we won't be so polite." With that, he turned sharply, mounting his bike. The others followed, revving their engines so loud the windows rattled. They roared down the dirt road, leaving behind a choking cloud of dust and the stench of exhaust. Luke clutched his mother's arm, wide-eyed. "Mom, what are we going to do?" Emily watched the dust settle over her land, her expression unreadable. Inside, her mind was already shifting, calculating, planning, moving pieces like a battlefield map. She crouched, looking her son in the eyes. Her voice was calm, firm. "We're going to protect what's ours." Luke swallowed hard, nodding. He trusted her completely, even if he didn't understand why her voice carried such certainty. As they went inside, Emily paused by the door, her gaze drifting across the farm she had built with her own hands. She had left behind rifles and missions long ago, but now, the ghosts of her past stirred awake. The Outlaws thought they had found an easy mark, a single mother with no one to defend her. They couldn't have known that beneath the quiet farmer's life beat the heart of a Green Beret sniper. And if they came back, she'd be ready. The farm looked peaceful at dawn. Birds skimmed across the fields, the dog barked lazily at rabbits in the hedgerow, and Luke helped his mother gather eggs from the chicken coop. But beneath the calm surface, Emily's senses remained sharp, tuned for danger. She had felt it in the way the outlaw leader had pointed his finger at her the day before, like a man making a promise. And promises like his were always kept. By late afternoon, the sound came again. Engines, louder this time, heavier. Luke dropped the basket of eggs, his face paling. The dog barked furiously, sprinting toward the road. Dust rose on the horizon, thicker than before. Not 8 bikes now, but a dozen, maybe more. Their engines thundered like an approaching storm. Emily wiped her hands on her jeans and stood in the yard, her jaw tightening. She didn't move toward cover, didn't hide. She stood straight, waiting. The gang rolled into her driveway, spreading out like a dark tide. Their bikes and trucks blocked the entrance completely, cutting off any escape. This wasn't a warning visit. This was a show of power. The leader climbed down first, the scar above his eyebrow splitting into a grin. He raised his arms theatrically. "Told you we'd be back." His men laughed and fanned out across the property. One kicked over a wooden crate, spilling tools into the dirt. Another knocked down a scarecrow in the field, stomping on its straw chest. 2 more leaned against Emily's truck, scratching the paint with their buckles. Luke stood frozen near the porch steps, his fists clenched. Emily placed a steady hand on his shoulder and nudged him gently toward the door. "Inside, Luke," she said firmly. "Now." He wanted to argue, but the tone in her voice, calm, commanding, made him obey. The screen door slammed shut behind him. The leader strolled closer, his boots crunching over gravel. He stopped a few feet from Emily, grinning like a wolf. "We like this place," he said loudly, making sure his men heard. "Wide open. Good cover. Close to town, but not too close. Perfect for us." He leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough for her to hear. "You don't belong here, lady. Pack up your kit and run before we decide to make you." Emily's eyes locked on his, unflinching. "This is my land. You're not welcome here." The grin faltered for a fraction of a second before he barked out a laugh. "You hear that, boys? She still thinks she's in charge." The men roared with laughter, but it was edged with something else, nervousness, irritation. There was something about the way she stood calm and still that made their mockery sound hollow. One of them swaggered forward, snapping a branch off the fence. He twirled it like a bat, pointing it at Emily. "Lady, you don't get it. We're not asking. We're telling." Another added, "Yeah, sell it to us, or else we'll take it piece by piece." The leader nodded approvingly. "You've got until the end of the week. Then we move in. And when we do, your boy's gonna learn the hard way what happens when people say no to us." Inside the house, Luke peeked through the window, his small hands trembling against the glass. He couldn't hear every word, but he didn't need to. The menace in their voices was clear enough. Emily's expression didn't change. Her voice was calm, level. "If you set foot here again, it won't end the way you think." Her words cut through the noise like a blade. The leader blinked, then scowled. "That a threat?" "It's a warning," Emily replied. The yard fell quiet for a moment. The men shifted, uncomfortable. They had expected begging, tears, maybe panic. Instead, they were staring at a woman who looked as though she had measured them already and found them lacking. The leader's scowl twisted into a sneer. He spit into the dirt at her boots. "You'll regret this." He turned sharply, waving his men back to their bikes and trucks. Engines roared. Dust filled the air, and within moments the farmyard was empty again. But this time, the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, charged like the calm before a storm. Luke rushed out as soon as the noise faded, his face pale. "Mom, they're not going to stop, are they?" Emily crouched down, gripping his shoulders firmly. Her eyes held his, steady and unshaken. "No, they won't. Men like that never stop unless someone makes them." Luke's voice wavered. "What are we going to do?" Emily looked out over her fields, the fences, the barn, the farmhouse she had built with sweat and sacrifice. She thought of the rifle case buried in the barn, untouched for years. She thought of nights lying motionless for hours, waiting for the right breath, the right shot. Her answer was simple. "We're going to be ready." That night, after Luke was asleep, Emily went to the barn. Dust coated the rafters, the old wooden beams groaning in the cool air. The moon rose high over the fields, silver light spilling across the farm like a watchful eye. Emily sat alone in the barn, the old crate open at her feet. Dust hung in the air, stirred by her steady movements as she lifted each piece of gear one at a time, like reuniting with old companions. Her fingers wrapped around the rifle stock first. It was heavier than she remembered, but familiar. She ran her palm over the worn grooves, the smooth metal cold beneath her skin. The scope glinted faintly in the moonlight. She hadn't held it in years, but the weight was a comfort, not a burden. She closed her eyes and inhaled. For a moment, she was back in a desert, lying prone in the sand, her heartbeat sinking with her breath, her finger steady against the trigger. She had sworn she'd left that life behind. But tonight, her instincts whispered, it's time again. By dawn, Emily had already mapped the farm like a battlefield. She walked the fence lines, the barn roof, the tree lines beyond the fields. Every angle, every distance, every possible point of cover. She calculated it all in silence. The outlaws thought her farm was an easy prize. They didn't realize they'd picked ground that could be turned into a fortress in the hands of someone who understood terrain like a second language. At the old oak tree by the north fence, she set up her first vantage point. From there, she had a clear line of sight to the road leading into the property. The tree's broad branches would shield her, and the brush beneath could hide her son if needed. At the barn, she reinforced the doors with heavy planks, hammering them into place with precise blows. Luke peeked out from the farmhouse window, his face pressed against the glass, curious and worried. Emily caught his gaze and gave a nod, reassuring but firm. This wasn't panic. This was control. In the afternoon, she called Luke outside. He hesitated, but she crouched to his level, her voice steady. Listen to me, Luke. If they come back, I need you to remember where to go. You hide in the cellar. You don't come out until I tell you, no matter what you hear. Understand? His small face tightened with fear. But Mom... Emily gripped his shoulders, her eyes locking on his. Understand. He swallowed and nodded. She softened then, brushing his hair back with her hand. Good, you're brave. Braver than you know. But bravery isn't about fighting, it's about being smart. You let me handle the rest. That night, Emily returned to the barn. She spread her gear on a workbench. Camouflage cloth, rope, a hunting knife, old tripwire she'd once used for training exercises. Improvised tools now became weapons. She rigged the fence posts with bells, small, hidden, just enough to warn her of movement. She set traps along the driveway, crude but effective, planks with nails ready to shred tires. In the barn loft, she stacked hay bales for cover and built herself a perch with a clean line of sight across the yard. Every motion was practiced, precise. She moved like a soldier again, measured steps, steady hands, her mind always 3 moves ahead. The quiet farm was transforming. To the outlaws, it was still just a patch of land. To Emily, it was a chessboard, and she was already placing pieces. When the work was done, she sat on the porch with Luke asleep inside. The night was still, but her senses buzzed. Every cricket chirp, every rustle in the trees, every breeze through the cornfield sharpened in her ears. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, focused, centered, ready. For so long she had tried to bury the soldier in her, convincing herself that the world she fought in was gone. But trouble had found her, as it always did. And now the part of herself she had silenced, the sniper, the Green Beret, rose to the surface again. Not as a ghost of war, but as a shield for her son and her land. At dawn, she tested her rifle. She set up makeshift targets, glass bottles on fence posts, rusted cans on the old tractor. From the barn loft, she lay prone, her cheek pressed against the stock. She breathed once, twice, 3 times. The shot cracked, echoing across the fields. The bottle exploded into dust and shards, another shot, another hit. She adjusted the scope with the care of an artist, her muscles moving with instinct. Luke peeked from the window, his eyes wide with both awe and fear. He had never seen this side of his mother, and that was how she wanted it. Until now. When the last target shattered, Emily lowered the rifle and exhaled. The soldier within her was awake, and there was no putting it back to sleep. She gathered her gear, packed it carefully, and stood in the barn doorway, scanning the horizon. Somewhere out there, the outlaws were planning their return. They thought her land would be easy to take. But Emily knew better. She had seen arrogance before. She had buried men who thought they were untouchable. Now she would remind these outlaws of a lesson she had carried across continents and battlefields. Numbers don't win fights. Discipline does, and she had more of it than they could ever imagine. The night was thick with silence, the kind that pressed against the skin. The moon was a thin silver arc in the sky, barely lighting the fields. Emily crouched in the barn loft, her rifle laid across the wooden beam, her cheek against the stock. Below, the dog paced restlessly, sensing the tension in the air. She had been waiting for hours, her breathing measured, her mind as calm as still water. Waiting was something she knew well. On missions, she'd once waited 2 days for a single shot. Tonight's wait was nothing compared to that. Inside the farmhouse, Luke slept in the cellar, tucked beneath a blanket. Emily had locked the hatch from the outside. She hated the fear in his eyes when she made him climb down, but she knew it was the safest place for him. Tonight wasn't about comfort. It was about survival. Then she heard it. Engines. At first faint, then louder, rolling across the hills like thunder. Headlights cut through the tree line, bobbing like predatory eyes. Gravel crunched, tires spat dust, and the outlaws returned. 15 this time, maybe more. Trucks and bikes filled the driveway, their lights sweeping over the farmhouse, the barn, the fields. The leader's voice boomed above the noise. "Tonight's the night, boys. Take it all!" The gang spread out, their boots stomping across her land. One fired his pistol into the air, the shot cracking across the valley. Another laughed as he smashed a fence post with a crowbar. Emily didn't flinch. She watched, silent through her scope. A biker moved toward her truck, reaching for the tires. Too close to the barn. Emily adjusted her aim, her breathing steady. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the sound muffled by the suppressor she'd screwed on earlier. The outlaw's tire iron flew from his hand as he screamed, dropping to his knees, clutching his shoulder. Chaos erupted. "Sniper!" One of them shouted, diving for cover. The leader roared back, "Find her! Spread out!" But they couldn't see her. She was the shadow, the ghost. Another man ducked behind a hay bale near the barn. Emily fired again. The bale exploded in a puff of straw and the outlaw scrambled away, cursing. Panic rippled through the group. They had come expecting a frightened mother with no defenses. Instead, they were in the crosshairs of a sniper who had turned her home into a kill zone. One outlaw sprinted toward the barn door, thinking he could flush her out. Emily let him get closer. The moment he yanked on the handle, a set of bells she had rigged rang out sharply, exposing him. He froze for a half-second, long enough. She dropped him with a clean shot to the leg and he collapsed, screaming for help. Another tried to circle behind the farmhouse. Emily shifted her scope, tracking him through the trees. She exhaled slowly, her finger tightening. The shot rang and his rifle spun from his hands as he fell into the brush. Every bullet was precise. Not lethal yet, but disabling, disarming, breaking their confidence. The leader stomped into the yard, waving his men on.
"She can't stop all of us."
"Push forward." But they hesitated. Every time they moved, she answered with fire. The driveway, the barn, the field, every angle they tried, she had already mapped. One outlaw revved his bike, charging the farmhouse like a battering ram. Emily aimed low. The shot ripped through his front tire. The bike flipped sideways, skidding across the gravel. The rider tumbled hard, groaning as he tried to crawl away. The others shouted in panic. "She's everywhere." "We can't even see her."
"What the hell is she?"
Emily remained calm, her mind cold and focused. Every muscle remembered this rhythm. Breathe, align, squeeze. She was no longer just a farmer defending her land. She was the sniper they had awakened, the soldier they never should have crossed. From her perch, she let the silence stretch. She wanted them to feel it. The dread of knowing someone was watching, someone who never missed. The leader's fury grew, his voice cracking. "You cowards, move. She's just one woman." His words rang hollow now. His men glanced nervously at each other, their bravado crumbling. Emily adjusted her aim, her scope landing on him. Through the crosshairs, she saw the scar on his face, the sweat on his brow, the twitch of fear he tried to hide. She could end it right here. One shot. But she didn't. Not yet. She shifted slightly and fired at the dirt near his boots. The gravel exploded, spraying his legs. He stumbled back, eyes wide. A warning. A message. She wanted him to know she chose not to end him, that she controlled every breath he took on her land. The men were unraveling fast. Two dragged their injured comrades back toward the trucks. Another dropped his weapon entirely, muttering, "This ain't worth it." The leader roared, furious at their retreat. But his voice was lost under the weight of fear now spreading through his gang. One by one, engines roared back to life. One by one, engines roared back to life. Bikes spun on the gravel, headlights swinging wildly as they fled down the driveway. The men who remained were limping, crawling, or cursing into the dirt, and Emily hadn't even left the barn. When the dust cleared, the leader stood alone in the yard. his chest heaving, his pride in tatters. He glared up at the farmhouse, then toward the barn loft, his fists shaking. "You think this is over?" he shouted into the night. "You think you've won?" Emily didn't answer. She simply tracked him through her scope, the red glow of his face square in her sights, his voice cracked with rage. "This ain't over, lady. You hear me?" But in his eyes she saw it, the flicker of something he couldn't hide. Fear. Emily lowered her rifle slowly. The yard was littered with broken fences, smoking engines, and blood-stained gravel. She exhaled deeply, steady, controlled. They would come again. She knew it. Men like him didn't quit after humiliation, but tonight she had planted the seed of doubt, cut their numbers, and proven one thing they'd never forget. This farm wasn't theirs to take. It belonged to a Green Beret sniper, and she wasn't finished yet. The night was still trembling from the chaos. Gravel smoked where tires had spun, and the air reeked of gasoline, gunpowder, and fear. Most of the outlaws were gone, scattered into the dark with their engines howling. But their leader remained. He stood in the middle of the yard, fists clenched, chest heaving, his scarred face twisted with rage. Around him the farm was silent. The only sound the groans of two injured men still dragging themselves toward the tree line. His eyes burned as they darted across the shadows trying to find her. "Show yourself," he bellowed, his voice raw, cracking the silence. "You think you're some kind of ghost? Hiding in the dark? Come out and fight me!" From the barn loft, Emily watched him through her scope. The crosshairs steadied over his chest, then his forehead. Her finger hovered against the trigger. She could end it with one breath, one squeeze, but she didn't. Not yet. This wasn't about the shot. This was about sending a message. She lowered the rifle, slid it into its case, and stood. For the first time that night, she made herself visible. The barn door creaked as she pushed it open, stepping into the yard. Her boots crunched on gravel, deliberate and steady. The moonlight caught her face, calm and unflinching. The leader froze, his grin faltering when he saw her walk toward him, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with the confidence of someone who had already won. "You've had your fun," Emily said evenly, her voice carrying across the yard. "Breaking fences, shooting at scarecrows, threatening my boy." She stopped 10 paces from him, her eyes sharp as steel. "Now it ends." He barked out a laugh, but it was hollow, forced. "You think because you got lucky with a rifle you scare me?" Emily tilted her head slightly. "Luck had nothing to do with it. Every shot tonight landed exactly where I wanted." His jaw tightened, his bluster crumbling. "Who the hell are you?" Her lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. "Green Beret, sniper." The word struck harder than a bullet. For a moment, silence reigned. The injured men froze mid-crawl, their eyes wide. The leader's laugh died in his throat. He shook his head, trying to cover his unease. "That's supposed to scare me? I don't care what you were." He raised his pistol, leveling it at her chest. His hand shook just barely, but enough for her to see. "All that training don't mean a thing now. It's just you and me." Emily didn't flinch. Her hand stayed at her sides, her voice calm. "You're already out of the fight. You just don't realize it yet." His finger twitched on the trigger, sweat beaded at his temple. And then she moved. In a single step, she closed the distance, knocking his wrist upward. The gun fired once, the shot cracking into the night sky, harmless. She twisted his arm, the pistol clattering to the dirt. Before he could recover, she drove her knee into his gut, folding him in half. He staggered, gasping, swinging wildly. Emily sidestepped, catching his punch and using his momentum to throw him to the ground. He hit hard, the wind bursting from his chest. The injured men nearby watched in stunned silence, too battered to intervene. The leader rolled, spitting blood into the dirt, scrambling for the pistol. Emily kicked it away, sending it spinning into the shadows. She stood over him, her stance solid, her breathing steady. "Listen to me," she said coldly, her voice low but carrying. "I gave you chances. I warned you. But you kept pushing." He coughed, glaring up at her with hate burning in his eyes. "You can't stop us. There'll be more, always more." Emily crouched, her eyes locking with his. "Maybe, but they won't be you. You're done here." Her hand shot out, grabbing the front of his vest. She pulled him close, her words sharp as a blade. "You think you're a predator. You're not. You're just another coward who mistook kindness for weakness. And tonight you learned the difference." She shoved him back into the dirt, standing tall over him. The leader staggered to his feet, holding his ribs, his pride more broken than his body. He stumbled toward his bike, spitting curses into the ground. "This ain't over," he growled, but the words rang hollow. Emily didn't move to stop him. She just watched, silent and steady, her presence heavier than any weapon. He mounted the bike, fumbling with the keys, his men limping after him. Engines coughed to life again, and slowly they retreated into the dark, their bravado shattered, their power broken. The yard fell still once more. The only sound was the wind rustling through the fields and the faint bark of the dog from the porch. Emily exhaled, her shoulders relaxing slightly. She glanced toward the farmhouse where Luke's small face peeked from the cellar window. His eyes were wide, full of fear and awe. She gave him a nod, a silent promise, it's over, for now. Emily knew this wasn't the end. Men like the outlaw leader carried grudges like scars. He might return or he might send others, but tonight he had learned something he would never forget. This farm wasn't a prize, it was a battlefield, and its defender wasn't just a single mother. She was a Green Beret sniper, and she had just put him in her sights. The sun crept over the horizon, casting long golden fingers across Emily Carter's farm. The night's violence lingered in the broken fences, the shattered glass glinting in the dirt and the skid marks carved deep into the driveway. Birds sang cautiously, as if unsure whether the storm had truly passed. Emily stood on the porch, her boots planted firmly on the wood, surveying the land she had defended. Luke sat beside her, wrapped in a blanket, his eyes still wide from everything he'd seen. He leaned against her shoulder and she rested a steady hand on his back. For the first time in days there were no engines, no shouting voices, no threats. Only silence, and the quiet pride of survival. By noon, word had already spread through the small town. Farmers who passed on the road slowed their trucks, glancing at the Carter farm with wide eyes. At the diner, people whispered over coffee mugs about the outlaws limping back into town before dawn, bloodied, bruised, their leader pale and silent. They looked like whipped dogs. One man muttered, "Wouldn't talk about what happened," another added. But the truth didn't need their words. The truth had already been written in their fear. Soon the story began to shift, retold in hushed tones. Some said the single mother on the farm had called in the sheriff's deputies. Others swore she had friends in the military who showed up in the night. But the ones who had seen her, who had watched her stand unshaken in the yard, whispered something different. She didn't need anyone's help. She handled it herself. That evening, the sheriff himself drove out to the farm. He stood awkwardly on the porch, his hat in his hands. "Heard you had some visitors," he said carefully. Emily gave a small shrug. "They won't be back." He studied her as though seeing her for the first time. Not just a farmer, not just a mother, but someone who carried a weight he couldn't define. "I won't ask how you managed," he said at last. "But whatever you did this whole town a favor." She said nothing. She didn't need thanks. The sheriff tipped his hat, glanced at Luke, and left without another word. Days turned into weeks, and the Carter farm returned to its rhythm. Emily mended the fences, replanted what had been trampled, and scrubbed the bloodstains from the dirt. Luke carried on with chores, though his eyes often lingered on the barn loft, where he had seen his mother become someone he hadn't known before. One evening, he asked the question that had been burning in him since that night. "Mom, how did you know how to do all that?" Emily paused, setting down her tools. She looked at him, her eyes softening. "Because before I was your mom, I was something else. I was a soldier. A sniper." His mouth opened in awe. "Like in the movies?" She chuckled softly. "Not like the movies, real life. Hard, dangerous, and nothing to brag about." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "But it taught me something important. You fight for what matters, and you never let fear decide for you." Luke nodded slowly, a spark of understanding lighting in his eyes. Meanwhile, in the outlaw circles, her name was becoming legend. Whispers passed from one gang to another about the single mom with a rifle, the farmer who turned her land into a battlefield. Some called her a ghost, others swore she had military backing, but one thing was clear. No one wanted to test her again. The leader never returned. Humiliated and broken, he carried the scar of that night not just on his face but in his pride. He had learned the hard truth: there were some people you didn't cross, and Emily Carter was one of them. On quiet nights, Emily sat on the porch, sipping coffee while Luke slept inside. She watched the stars scatter across the sky and listened to the soft hum of the fields. The rifle stayed cleaned and ready in the barn, not because she craved another fight but because she understood the world. Trouble had a way of finding you no matter how far you ran. But she wasn't running anymore. She was rooted here, in this land, with her son and her peace. And if anyone came again, they would discover what the outlaws had learned, that behind the face of a farmer lived a warrior who had never truly retired. The townsfolk still whispered, still speculated, but Emily ignored it. She didn't need their admiration or their fear. Her reward was simpler: Luke's safety, the steady rhythm of the farm, the sunrise over fields she had fought to keep. She had lived through war once, and she had hoped never to again. But when it came to her doorstep, she had answered it with precision and strength. Because that's what she was trained to do, because that's who she was. And now, everyone knew. The single mother on the quiet farm wasn't just another face in the town. She was Emily Carter, former Green Beret sniper, and her story had become legend.